my topic for this afternoon. And you might be wondering why. Oh, that's the wrong side. Here's your answer. We see the Netherlands on this side of the graph, and we see Germany on that side of the graph. Germany has the biggest private rental sector in Europe, together with Switzerland, but we're talking about Germany. And the Netherlands has the biggest social rental sector in Europe. And Australia is sorry, Canada is well, my excuse is I just returned from Australia. I didn't use that graph there, but it just.
You should feel the difference if you walk outside.
You know the black part?
You should feel the difference if you walk outside.
Outside, yeah. There we go. Anyway, so what you do see generally in the middle, most countries, home ownership is the majority tenure, either financed by mortgage or outright ownership. But the Netherlands and Germany and a couple of other countries still are exceptional. So that's the reason why we're focusing on social rental housing in these countries today. I quickly will start with a few outcomes. Then I will try to define the sector and the landlords a bit better for you, because these terms usually have their own meaning in every country. Like we learned this morning as well in Canada about the different types of social landlords. I will briefly talk about the histories. I actually think that there is a long path dependency in these two countries. They started with their policies, in contrast to what Sean was saying about elections and changes in policies. They started early last century or after World War II with their trajectory, and it still is in place today, although with changes, of course, which we will see based on the latest developments, which is item 4, and the last item will be, we'll try to talk a little bit about partnerships, if they're there maybe, in these policies. So first, housing affordability. These two graphs show the share of households either in arrears, that is the top graph, or which are considered to have a housing cost overburden. And these data are from the European Union Survey of Income and Living Conditions. So you can compare in principle the 28 member countries of the European Union. And there is also data on Switzerland, for instance, and some other countries which are not a member of the European Union. And what they do is they distinguish between households whose income is below 60% of the median income in a country, corrected for household composition, equivalized, they call it. So say the at risk of poverty households, they're called, and they have the rest, the other households which are not at risk of poverty, their income is higher than 60% of median equivalized income. So the first two bars are about being in arrears with your energy costs. 3 months in arrears with your energy costs. Those are the at risk of poverty households, the black bars, and the gray bars are the not at risk of poverty households. And then we have the next two bars, at risk of poverty and not at risk of poverty, people who are in arrears with their rent payments or their mortgage payments. So the trend or the situation is clear. People who are at risk of poverty, population at risk of poverty, a larger share of them is in arrears than the population not at risk of poverty. But the idea was to compare Germany with the Netherlands. If we generalize, they're like in the middle. So then we see that in principle in the Netherlands, the at-risk of poverty in areas with their rents and mortgage payments is higher than in Germany. And in Germany, it's especially the energy problems. So you already see that different things are playing in the different countries. And then we have the lower graph. This is the share of population that are considered to pay more than 40% of their income on housing costs, including the energy costs. So that, in this database, those are the people at risk of unaffordability, if you want to call them that. And you do see, I make a distinction here in the rental sector. They make a distinction that population renting at market price and population renting at reduced price or rent-free. And we see for the Netherlands that especially the tenants reduced at, the tenants paying market rent, they are, there's a larger share, let's say, about almost 30% of them are considered at risk of unaffordability, housing affordability, and in Germany these are lower, but it's the other way around. It's especially those who are paying reduced rent. So just a long story, just to show you that there are some small differences, but there are problems as well on affordability. And this database, of course, also has some information on overcrowding and bad quality and these types of things, but I don't have these data for you, considering the time. And usually they score relatively well compared to a number of other countries, especially in Eastern Europe and in Southern Europe. And we have the second topic, rental tenure and landlords. So if we consider the total rental sector at 100%, then we see that for Germany, subsidized renting nowadays is less than 4% of stock. So it's competing with Canada. It used to be the highest share was about 20%, and that was in the 1980s. And in the Netherlands, we're talking about social rental. Nowadays, it's 30%, and the highest share was 36% in 1995. So, you already see that I'm using two different terms. Subsidized and social. In Germany, it's about, as we saw, well, I didn't really tell you maybe, but the private rental sector was the biggest in Europe, but there was no social landlord in Germany. Why? Because they only subsidize housing. They don't have a social sector as such. In the Netherlands, we do have a social sector as such. And therefore, I call it affordable renting, including these two terms, for subsidized and social. Now, then you see the different landlord types. In the Netherlands, it's simple. We have only, nowadays, non-profit landlords. And I don't know who was here yesterday, but that's, I explained that. They're called housing associations. And they're private organizations, but they're licensed or registered, and they have a public task. And the government sets the framework for that. So, and that was a conscious choice by government in the 1901 housing law, that they wanted arm's length organizations, distance from the government, so that they could not be, like public organizations, like in the UK. They are sometimes, they don't have any rights and these kind of things. And they didn't want any cooperatives, either because you have cooperative ownership, even if it's a rental form. It could be an ownership form, but it could also be a rental form. Then you get differences in interest between the owner and the occupier. So it was a conscious choice to go for the non-profit, private, registered organization. They're called housing associations. In Germany, we actually only have market landlords, as we did see. Private actors. And they might be either private corporates, like housing companies, or tenant cooperatives. So the tenants own together the building, but they do still pay a rent. Or they might be private persons. That's not strange, I think. In many countries, in most countries actually, private persons are the major suppliers of private rental housing and not institutions. And the one that's a bit strange is that there are private municipal housing companies in Germany. So why are they private? Because the stock is owned by the municipalities, and the municipalities can sell the stock. And they have to break even. They cannot just offer the dwellings for low rent, cheap rent to vulnerable households, the needy, because then they would be generating a loss and they would have a problem. So Germany just has market actors on the housing market and also on the social market, on the subsidized market, sorry, I said. And Netherlands has the non-profit actors. So why is that? As I tried to indicate before, these choices were made long ago, in the beginning of the last century, or after World War II, especially in the Netherlands. We had an enormous shortage of housing, but the government wanted to make the Netherlands competitive, to build up the economy quickly, so the living cost had to be low, therefore the housing cost had to be low. And the choice was made for building up a huge social rental sector, large-scale operations, large areas, big neighborhoods, that type of operation. And even though I said that the government made the choice for, say, private non-profits, in the beginning, the government was the main steering actor when this operation was done in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, even until the 90s. And it was done with the help of supply-side subsidies. Germany has a different story. It's about the social market economy philosophy that the first government after World War II tried to implement. The idea, it's based on the Freiburg economic school or the liberals. People know these terms. But the idea is that the economy is leading, that social welfare is best served by economic progress, implying that government intervention supports the economy, that it is done via the market, that it's done, that it's market-led, that it's tenure neutral, and that it's temporary. An example of market-led, for instance, is that rent control in Germany is market-led, while in the Netherlands, rent control is government-steered. The government takes a decision each year with how much rents can increase or should increase. Some of these terms will become more clear when I continue. So what does, especially for Germany, what do all these terms mean? Well, when investments can be in different ways. Germany has a depreciation deduction in income tax for any investment. So if you invest in a shop, or if you invest in housing, or if you invest in a business, other business, you can deduct by tax your investment 2% each year. That's the general deduction. After the World War, this depreciation deduction was very attractive, was made very attractive for investments in private rental housing. So for instance, you could deduct, I forget the numbers, but say it's regressive. So the first year you could deduct 10%, and the second year 8%, and so forth until you reach the 2, and then you could deduct it 2% per year. And what happened also was that these dwellings were sold to the next person, and the next, or the next is, yeah, and then they could start again. So any investment had that depreciation deduction, but there were many years that it was more attractive to invest into private rental housing instead of into other businesses. The idea is, in this case, that this would balance the interest of the landlord because they could make a profit in the situation where there was tenant protection and rent control, because these types of things usually lower your profit chances. So there was a trade-off, and apparently renting was considered a good investment in that time. For private persons, additionally, investment in rental housing was made attractive by the possibility to negatively gear. So if you were making a loss, you could, how do you say it? You could deduct it from other income. And so you can, and also you were not taxed on your capital gains for as long as you were not speculatively running your business. Meaning, if you had owned the property for 10 years, you would not be paying any capital gains tax once you were selling it. Last but not least, this is the affordable part of the renting, the social part. The government had a supply side subsidy for investors in private renting if you agreed for 50 years to rent out your private rental dwelling to the target groups of the program, which were lower income households. So what we have here is a temporary supply side subsidy, and after World War II, it was 50 years, the period of subsidization, and the period of lower rents, and the period of renting out to low-income households. Nowadays, it's between 10 and 15 years, the period of subsidization. So the tenant eligibility conditions were set by government nationally. So now you see how it works with only private renting, but subsidization. So you do create some social rental housing, but temporarily, based on that philosophy I talked about. And the depreciation deduction, just a detail, it was also available for owner-occupiers. That's the tenure neutrality thing. Housing allowances are also available for owner-occupiers, not only for tenants, not only for private tenants, and not only for social tenants. So I'm not saying it's still like that, all that, but that was the intention. treating the different tenures in the same way, letting regulation be market-led, etc. Supporting temporarily wherever there was need. So, in principle, the Netherlands rental market and the German rental market were classified as unitary rental markets, implying that there was competition between social, subsidized, and non-social, non-subsidized renting with the help of government. Which implied, in this case, largely tenure-neutral rental policy, which I also tried to explain with other examples. But, for instance, security of tenure. It doesn't matter whether you live as a tenant in a social rental dwelling or in a private rental dwelling in the Netherlands. It doesn't matter whether you live in a subsidized rental dwelling in Germany or a not subsidized rental dwelling. Your rent contract is indefinite. In the Netherlands, even more extreme. You could debate about that. Economists are usually negative about that, but I'm an economist. But rent control, I think I said that last night, is the same, or used to be the same, for social renting and private renting. No difference. So it doesn't matter who owns the dwelling. Any dwelling up to the 710 euros rent per month, the rents are regulated. And a few years ago, it was still 92% of the rental sector, which the rents were controlled like that. Yes, 5 minutes. Okay, let me see where we are. Okay, anyway, so in principle, there was security of tenure, there was consumer protection. So if you go into a rental dwelling and the rent relatively is too high for quality, there are ways to either go to court or to go to a rental committee and get things sorted out. The terms of tenancy, those are the rent increases. I talked about those. Government sets them, or they are market-led. The fair trading is the rent commissions, and the courts and the housing assistance. I talked about that as well. As a tenant, you can always get housing assistance in the Netherlands and in Germany. So, in principle, we have different policies in the past, but similar or same pathways for the more recent future. Because starting from the unitary rental model, meaning both countries did not have a safety net social rental sector. But what Germany is left with, 4%, seems more like a safety net social rental sector, subsidized rental sector. So both countries have decreased their stock in due course. Both countries have decreased their subsidization. In both countries, rents are closer to market rent. So affordability problems are increasing. And in generally, so there is this move from, it used to be broad segments of the population in both countries that could access either subsidized or social renting, and nowadays it's more focused and targeted. And Germany, maybe I should explain that. Germany has lost more of its stock simply because, the shortening of the period from 50 to 15 or 10 years. So the dwellings fall out of the subsidy regulation, and also because of different developments. Germany is a country with big differences in population growth. Many areas are shrinking. So in a lot of areas it wasn't necessary to invest in extra housing. There were no shortages. So it was not needed for the government to invest more and more. There were generally balances on the housing market. Of course, there were some exceptions, like in Munich, the big cities. But that was one of the reasons why there were no new subsidies and why there were no new investments in subsidized renting. And why, therefore, Germany has ended up with the 4% about the stock. So in principle, in both countries, lower income households increasingly are renters, either in private renting or in social renting, and higher income households are increasingly homeowners, which was not the situation after World War II. But we have different trends now. In Germany, as I explained, there was no need to subsidize any longer because of population developments. But finally, since 2008, the global financial crisis hit many countries in Europe. Didn't hit Germany. In many countries, house prices plummeted. In Germany, it didn't. Rents and house prices started rising. It's of course coincidence, I think, that it's 2008. But if for years and years you don't really have extra construction, at some point the penny falls or tips or whatever, you need more housing then. So finally, very up to date, in September 2018, the German government announced that they sent plans to the parliament to upscale all their instruments that they have. So they want to improve, again, the depreciation deduction. Instead of the 2% each year of the investment that you would deduct, it's going to be regressive again, higher in the first few years and then going down. They're going to reintroduce their supply side subsidy for the subsidized rental housing. So they need more affordable housing, and because it's a temporary system, they need to upscale their financial support for that. In the Netherlands, the story is different. Since 2010, we have municipalities. The municipalities negotiate with the landlords for the subsidized rental housing, and the other levels they finance as well, and they make the legislation. So you can't do it by yourself. And then, what I was saying, the municipalities and the private landlords, that's a negotiation. It's not like a program. You have to talk about how many dwellings, which dwellings, are they new, are they existing, and the municipality actually buys some allocation rights to dwellings for the vulnerable households. And in the Netherlands, there's always the deal also between municipalities and social landlords. Municipalities have to make the housing plan, and they have to negotiate with the social landlords. And the new situation is that non-profit landlords are no longer have the first choice to develop all kinds of housing. First, the idea is we look if there's private supply or private investors that would like to do something. First, see if they can manage, and if not, then the local government falls back on the social landlords. And then last but not least, we have a Landlord-Tenant Consultation Act, which I mentioned last night as well. So if, as a landlord, you want to do major renovations or any other types of plans, you need 70% of your tenants to support these plans. Otherwise, you can't do them. That's legally set by the government. Thank you very much.